Thank you so much for coming. My name is Stacy, and I'm a bookseller and the events coordinator at Belmont Books. Belmont Books, for those of you who are not familiar with us, is an independent and locally owned bookstore in Belmont, Massachusetts. Before we begin, I'd like to let you know that we have a number of virtual events coming up, including Michelle Duster discussing her book about her great-grandmother, Ida B. Wells, with the Boston Globe's Renee Graham, and that is tomorrow night. You can register for this and our other events on our website, belmontbooks.com, which is also where you can purchase tonight's book, Tiger Girl and the Candy Kid, and signed copies are available. If you have any questions for the authors, please type them into the Q&A section and we will get to as many questions as we can. We're very excited to welcome Glenn and Bill. I want to tell you a little bit about them and then I will turn the event over to them. Glenn Stout is a freelance writer, author, and editorial consultant, and served as series editor of the Best American Sports Writing from its inception to its end. He is the author of Young Woman in the Sea, which is under option with Paramount Studios, very exciting, and is scheduled to go into pre-production in 2022. Glenn has authored, co-authored, edited, or ghostwritten 100 books for both general trade and juvenile audiences, primarily focusing on sports and history. Glenn has served as a workshop leader, editor, consultant, and has taught narrative nonfiction at the Archer City Story Center and solo workshops on the writing of book proposals. He is the winner of many awards and honors, including the Seymour Medal and Larry Ritter Award, and has been on the New York Times and Boston Globe's bestseller and notable book lists. Glenn is a native of Ohio and a dual citizen of the US and Canada. He has worked as a librarian, a janitor, a painter, a minor league baseball ticket seller, and a construction worker. A full-time writer since 1993, he moved from Massachusetts to Vermont in 2003. He's an avid kayaker, cyclist, and photographer, and plays the bodhran, a skin drum. Bodhran, gotcha. Bill Littlefield, a nationally known author and veteran sports commentator, was the host of National Public Radio and WBUR's Only a Game program from its beginning in 1993 to July 2018, covering mainstream and offbeat United States and international sports. Bill taught humanities at Curry College and writing courses at the Harvard University Summer School and in Harvard's Kennedy School of Government summer program for master's candidates. Bill is the author of 2 novels, 2 collections of his radio and magazine work, and a collection of profiles of athletes for young readers. He was the guest editor of the Best American Sports Writing, 1998, and his column reviewing sports-related books appears every other month in the Boston Globe. Bill is the editor of the upcoming book, The Top of His Game, which is also available for pre-order from Belmont Books. Only a Game and Bill's commentaries have won numerous Associated Press awards, and he lives in Boston. And without further ado, I'm going to turn the event over to Glenn and Bill.
Well, Bill, do you want to start or should I?
I'll be happy to start. I'm gonna then I'll step out of the way, because what we're trying to do here tonight is first of all, thank you for that very nice introduction. I wish I was still writing for the Globe, but I'm not. Anyway, what we're trying to do here is tell as many people as possible about Tiger Girl and the Candy Kid, which is Glenn's new book, and it deserves a gigantic readership. And I hope that will be the result. And many people have already said that it should be a movie. And so if we've already gotten an offer, Glenn, I don't know whether you've heard from the Hollywood people yet, but I think it's inevitable. In any case, my association with Glenn goes back many years, and we've had a lot of fun together doing these kinds of things, although we've never done one on Zoom before. So I'm going to just turn this over to Glenn. He can talk about, I hope at the beginning, the rather curious way in which he found the subject of this book, because I think that's fascinating. And I think readers and writers are often interested in how one comes to write about a certain subject. So maybe that's a place to start.
Okay. Well, I will talk about that. I was planning on talking about that. And I want to thank Belmont Books and Bill and Houghton Mifflin as well for putting this event on, and thank everyone for coming. This is very exciting. I got my COVID shot today, so this is a twofer as far as I'm concerned. But just a quick overview of the book. You know, it's about Margaret and Richard Whittemore, two young kids from Baltimore who, in the wake of World War I, a pandemic, and then a very severe economic depression, looked around the world of the early 1920s where prohibition was running rampant and lawlessness ruled the land, and they decided, let's get ours. And they did so without regret. They did so without really thinking twice, and they decided to embark on a life of crime together, to live the life that they saw on the movie screens of the time and in the magazines at a time when the entire world was changing. It was shifting from the Victorian era really into the modern age. There were movies, there was electricity, there were radios, people had cars. They were living, quite frankly, in the modern world, the world we still live in today, whereas their parents and previous generations weren't. I first encountered the story 15 years ago, more or less, when I was researching and writing Young Woman in the Sea, my biography of Gertrude Ederle. And I kept on stumbling across headlines as I was going through reels of microfilm about Tiger Girl and the Candy Kid. I was initially intrigued by the nicknames. Who wouldn't be? But I was quickly surprised to find that I kept on finding more and more and more headlines about these people. I started reading the stories, and I decided then, back in 2006, that this was going to be my next book. Well, 15 years later, now it's my latest book. It took a while to get there. Things like a recession and other projects got in the way, but I'm really, really excited to see that it's finally coming out. And, you know, it was funny because as I started to actually write the book after researching over and over and over for years and years and years, I actually had a hard time getting going. And then I recalled something that Bill Hines, who we just spoke about, and Bill edited his collection called Top of His Game, a wonderful journalist, world-class journalist, so influential to so many of us. It was something that Bill Hines, I think, told Bill on a radio interview. And Bill said that he always found out, he was a big fan of classical music. And when he started a story, he said he had to find the right chords at the beginning. It was like a piece of music. Once you determine the key signature and the time signature and the key and the right chords, then it all came through. So that's sort of what I did with this book, because I'd written a prologue, and the book starts with a prologue that kind of jumps you into the middle of the story. And then it backs off to Margaret and Richard getting married. And I'll start with that. I'll just read for about 5 or 6 minutes just to give you some of the flavor of the book, and then we can talk and take questions. But I'll let you know where Bill Hines inspired me to find the chords of the book, because I was having a struggle. And fortunately, I was able to find them. But chapter 1 begins this way. It's called Till Death. On a cool gray morning in October 1921, Richard Reese Whittemore stood in front of West Baltimore's Carnarvon Methodist Episcopal Church South, flanked by a motley collection of his pals, smoking and spitting on the sidewalk. More at home in a pool room than a church pew, they sported off-the-rack jazz suits. Only weeks past his 20th birthday, Whittemore was already beginning to spin out a new life from an old one, reaching toward a vision of himself only he could see. Some of the girlfriends of the bride-to-be were already seated inside, quietly chatting away, awaiting the arrival of Margaret Messler for what was supposed to be the happiest day of the young couple's lives. In many ways, that would prove to be true. The next 5 years would be marked with enough tragedy to last several lifetimes, and end with the Whittemores on the front page of virtually every newspaper in the country. Their tabloid love story more improbable than any motion picture. It would also leave at least a half dozen men buried in the ground, a half dozen more hanging from the bars of a jail cell, and the whereabouts of several $100,000 in cash and gems, an enduring mystery. And here is where Bill Hines inspired me, because I was struggling with the attitude and approach I would bring to the book. Tiger Girl and the Candy Kid are not important because of the crimes they committed, the lives they took, or really their relationship. Their story is no simple romantic coupling. It is the torrid romance of an entire era, one that only matters for the glimpse it offers into a time and place. America in transition at the end of the Progressive Era, hurtling headlong and head down into the Jazz Age, a time when everything was changing so fast and revealing so many obvious contradictions and inequalities that what made sense yesterday did not make sense today, and no one quite knew what tomorrow might bring. Just as the lives and crimes of Bonnie and Clyde Parker provided mittens into the Depression era, when desperate times drove people to ever more desperate measures, Tiger Girl and the Candy Kid punch a ticket into the roaring 20s. Yet their world was not the same as that chronicled by F. Scott Fitzgerald, where money and status and privilege turned hedonistic self-destruction into a new kind of aesthetic. For Richard and Margaret, the Jazz Age wasn't about raccoon coats and cocktails, cis boom bod profligate excess, but how those romanticized mythologies of the era provided an irresistible fantasy, and how trying to live out that fantasy played out. Life and death in real time. And I go on to describe their wedding, which was not an ostentatious affair. Richard's sister had had quite a wedding several months earlier. His family, although not wealthy, was very well respected, still working class, and Margaret was very much working class. But they were young kids. They decided to get married. Richard and Margaret each repeated the standard wedding vows, committing to each other for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and health, to love and to cherish until we are parted by death. Neither realized how soon those vows would loom over their union. They then dashed from the church, presumably under a few handfuls of rice, and headed to the rest of their lives with no known destination other than a rented room. There seemed no obvious way out of the 15th Ward, their Baltimore neighborhood. The newspapers carried no mention of their wedding, no description of Margaret's dress or her bouquet or the feathers in her hat or a honeymoon. They apparently had no real plans for anything beyond the next few days, except for each other. For that, they would do anything. It was love, or at least lust for something more than what they had. Dizzy over each other and drunk on the era, they dove together headlong into the sordid depths of this new world. Maybe Margaret thought she could save her husband. Maybe Richard thought he could take her away to a better place. Maybe together they both could be more than what they were alone. She was impressionable and eager, as she said later, trying to explain all that happened next. I wanted a good time. He has given me one, and all these lovely clothes. But eventually, hidden in her desire for a good time and nice things was something more. Maybe the two of them, together, each driving the other, could have more than that. Maybe together they could make a life just like the ones they saw in the movies and read about in the magazines. Maybe he could find a way to give her all the good times she dreamed of. Maybe she could help make that happen. There was no family money to fall back on, no career or particular skill available to either of them to make a decent wage, much less become prosperous. All they had was each other, Margaret's devotion and material desires paired with Richard's criminal guile and greed. 8 days after their wedding, as the joy of holy matrimony faded and the flowers from Margaret's modest wedding bouquet turned brown and began to drop, Richard Reese Whittemore was arrested and charged with burglary. They were on their way. And that's how their marriage started. A week after the wedding, he broke into a house, was charged with burglary, and was sentenced to the Maryland State Penitentiary. It all, and then the rest of it happened. So that's just a tease as to how they started off. Suffice to say, things get worse from there, but also I think in a way that's entertaining in some respects, but one that offers an awful lot of insight into the times and still speaks to us today.
But into the times, certainly, but into our times as well. As one of the things that you mentioned that I think is fascinating is you were intrigued by the number of times you ran across these headlines and these rather garish, spectacular stories about these two young criminals. And it struck me that the way in which, and people were fascinated by them, people paid attention, they read about them, they talked about them, and they became larger than life figures in the same way that celebrities become larger than life figures today. Just to pick at random, I happened to be watching TV the other day, and I saw that the Kardashians were going off the air. And I sort of found myself wondering why they were ever on the air. And they were on the air because they were the Kardashians. They were famous for being famous. And in some ways, you know, the Candy Kid and the Tiger Girl were likewise. There's something gathered around them. They were famous for being famous after a while.
Well, they came into flower, so to speak, at the beginning of the age of celebrity. In the 1920s, you could be famous if you sat on a flagpole for 3 days and you would be in the newspapers. You could be famous if you danced for, 72 hours without stopping. You would be in the newspapers. To a degree, they looked at the emerging celebrityhood and said to themselves, that's what we want. They wanted the material goods as well, but they also bathed in the attention that eventually came their way after they were caught. They became jewel thieves is what the Candy Kid and the Tiger Girl did. Richard went into prison. He met up with these master jewel thieves from Europe who had invented the can opener and had cracked safes on 2 continents before they got caught in Baltimore and sentenced to prison. And he fell under their sway in prison, and they looked at him and saw this tough guy who would do basically anything, who could be the muscle and they would be the brains. And instead of cracking safes, they would steal them sort of the old-fashioned way with guns, but they would do it in a very, very controlled, choreographed way, very quick, in and out, boom. So it served each other. But and it gave Margaret and Richard access to this lifestyle that they wanted, all the money in the world. They lived in the nicest hotels and the best apartments in New York City and went to the most fabulous cabarets. And then once they got caught, it went up a notch. They were suddenly pictures in the paper, journalists gathering around them, hanging on every word.
Love was the story then. Love was the story. I mean, love was the story. People liked to think of them as romantic.
Sure. And they played into that because at a certain point, Richard says, I'll confess if you'll just let her go free. Well, once he said that, they weren't just criminals anymore. They were like Romeo and Juliet, Samson and Delilah, and all the flappers, because Margaret was a flapper, and their boyfriends, who were at the time referred to as either swains or sheiks, they saw in Margaret and Richard part of their story. That's what they wanted to be. They wanted to be in the newspapers too. They wanted to have all that stuff. They wanted to go to the cabarets. They didn't look at them in horror because they'd committed crimes and some people got killed along the way. They looked at them with envy. This is what they wanted to be.
But it wasn't just the aspiring criminals who felt that way. I mean, there were people on the street reading about them and sort of debating about what they meant and who they were and what were they really like, and all of those same sorts of things that people talk about with respect to celebrities today.
Right. They couldn't get enough of them, and it coincided with the tabloid press in the United States. And the tabloids went crazy over Tiger Girl and the Candy Kid. Crime sold. The tabloids knew that, but this was something new. That's why we call them America's original gangster couple. There'd never been a gangster couple before. And all of a sudden you had these two kids, photogenic, quotable, who loved the limelight. And the newspapers soon realized that everything they printed about them sold. And, half the people bought it and read it in horror, but they read it. And half of them bought it and read it and loved every second of it. So, you had this doubleness where everybody was fascinated for them. The older generation was, cast a disparaging eye at them, while the younger generation looked at them, in awe. They wanted to be them. And it just created this, for a brief period of time, for 5 or 6 months in 1926, they were as famous as any two people in America. I mean, Gertrude Ederle was trying to swim the English Channel at the same time. She wasn't on the front page of the New York Times 40 times, they were. And, everything they said and did was reported. When he went on trial in Buffalo for a bank robbery, the journalists would surround his cell and he would hold court, and he was, quotable. He would joke with them and laugh, and, and he loved the spotlight. So, I just kind of fell in love with that whole aspect of the story, and the way it tells us a lot about the modern age. One of the things that's been really both gratifying and intriguing to me is, of those people that have read the book so far, the degree to which millennials and younger, and in particular younger women, have responded to the book. They recognize what you just spoke about, and particularly in terms of Margaret, they're very sympathetic to her.
Mm-hmm.
They root for her. They see aspects of today in her story, which I think is really, really intriguing.
And she was no dope. I mean, she knew how to play it.
No, she wasn't dumb. It's easy to kind of, and I don't do this in the book, it would be easy to now kind of step back and kind of try to psychoanalyze both of them. I mean, Richard, yeah, he was probably sort of a sociopath, Margaret,
part.
Yeah, but I don't do that in the book. I try to stay in the time of the story, because otherwise I'm just speculating. But Margaret, she realizes, particularly after Richard is convicted, that they're interested in her, and she's got things to say, and she can advocate for her husband. And they actually attract all this outside attention from people who are against the death penalty and all of that. And Margaret sort of becomes a spokeswoman for that. And these are two kids who never graduated high school. Richard was in and out of reformatories and prisons from the age of 10. That's kind of a sidelight of the story. He goes in as a 10-year-old because he played hooky, and he basically comes out, gets spit out about 10 years later as a master criminal. That's what the penal system did for Richard Whittemore. It took a kid who played hooky and turned him into a killer. Not a big surprise if you look very hard at the penal system back then. It was just absolutely horrific, particularly for younger boys. But they rode a wave, and I don't think they knew it was there before they were on top of it. I don't think anybody did.
Once you had really gotten involved in reading enough about these two to know their story, and particularly to know what a sensation they were, albeit for a fairly brief period of time, were you surprised that nobody else had written about them?
I was absolutely shocked. Like I said, I got on this story in 2006. Since 2006, I have had a Google alert for both their names, because I was so certain that somebody else would stumble across their story. There's a brief Wikipedia page that's all wrong, and I was mortified that somebody else would come across the story before I did, because there was no lack of material. I mean, if anything, my challenge was to wade through so much material to make it make sense. But no one ever did. And I was curious as to why that happened. And the only thing I can come up with is, they took place before there were talking pictures and before there were newsreels. And, you look at the later generation of gangsters, Bonnie and Clyde, John Dillinger, Pretty Boy Floyd, and you had motion pictures of them and a newsreel voiceover accompaniment. that was delivered at the movies, in between features every week, so people could see them. Candy Kid and Tiger Girl, it's only in the newspapers. And once they were gone, there was really no way to relive them. And then I think too that at the end of the 1920s, once the crash came in, people didn't want to look at the 1920s too closely anymore for a while. They mythologized it later in the gangster films in the 1930s. Interestingly enough, many of the people who ended up, journalists mostly, ended up going to Hollywood in the 1930s, writing screenplays, producing those films, the Roaring Twenties, White Heat, Jimmy Cagney films, Humphrey Bogart films. Many of those journalists cut their teeth covering Tiger Girl and the Candy Kid. In many ways, he became the archetype of the gangster, the tough guy with a heart. She became the archetype for the gun mole, the femme fatale who, makes the tough guy have a heart. And every time I watch, a gangster film from the 1930s, I see elements of their story in almost every movie I see. All of a sudden, I can't hear you, Bill.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I'm looking at some of these questions, and one of them is maybe a place we should have started, or you should have started, but somebody's curious about how these nicknames came to be.
Sure. Tiger Girl, the sort of started off as a film by Lillian Gish called Tiger Lil, that later, in a later iteration of that movie, was changed to Tiger Girl, a woman who was both sensual and innocent, sexually ferocious, but also Polly Pureheart. It ended up becoming adopted by, it was also a song, but it also ended up becoming adopted by the tabloid press to describe flappers gone bad. There was a young woman in California in 1922, 16-year-old, who her mother wouldn't let her go dancing, so she bashed her head in with a hammer. They called her a Tiger Girl. And there were several other Tiger Girls, kind of under the same mold. Flapper girls gone bad. And Margaret, when she was first arrested with her husband, they were in an apartment in Philadelphia with other gang members, and the police burst in, somebody hit the lights, and there was a shootout, and it was Margaret who was passing the guns around to the other gang members. So the press and police started calling her Tiger Girl. Richard was called Candy Kid after he was finally arrested for the last time. And that has several meanings. One, Candy Kid means a sweet talker. You could talk a girl into anything. He's always a candy kid.
So it was
he can talk
slang of that era.
Yeah, he can talk a girl into anything. But it had other meanings too. Even back then, candy was slang for drugs. And a candy kid was somebody who used cocaine. Cocaine and morphine were commonly used among the gang members. You wouldn't expect that today, but it was those drugs were not uncommon back then. And also, candy is also slang for diamonds. So that fit Richard Whitmore like a glove in every way, shape, and form you could look at those nicknames. And the press, of course, once they had the nicknames, they had Tiger Girl first. Once they got Candy Kid, boom, then they had a coupling that they could really sell. Because if it was Tiger Girl and Richard, that doesn't work. But Tiger Girl and the Candy Kid, you can sell that every day for 2 cents. And they did on every street corner in the country.
Yeah. It's interesting to me that you found yourself checking the progress or lack of same in terms of other people possibly taking up this story. There must have been a certain level of anxiety, or after a while, did you say, no, wait, I really am the only person who's going to do this?
Well, I was terrified. I put together a proposal back in as soon as Young Woman in the Sea was done, and we thought it was going to be a big deal. Myself and my agents, we thought all these publishers were going to bid on it, and the 2008 recession hit. And as it turned out, nobody bid on it. And so I sat on the proposal, and I had any number of people tell me, professionals in the publishing business, you can never repitch a proposal. That just doesn't work. But about 3 years ago, when I finished up another project, I said to my agents, this is the only book I want to do. So let's put it out there again. I worked on it a little more. It ended up working out for the best because more resources were more readily available to me. More newspapers were available online, which was a real help, because although I do love scrolling through microfilm, I don't want to do it 24 hours a day for years. It's a lot easier to do it online. So, but the whole time I felt like, you know, I felt like the Whittemore gang felt when they knew there were diamonds in a safe. I'm like, if I can just get to it first, I think I have a really, really good story to tell. You know, because they just, you know, they also intersected with so many, you know, figures. I mean, his defense attorney was Edgar Allan Poe, the descendant of the Edgar Allan Poe. You know, they hung out in cabarets with people like Gloria Swanson. Um, you know, he knew Mayor Jimmy Walker's brother, because when they were hanging out in those cabarets, they were rubbing elbows and other things with some of the, you know, best known politicians and celebrities and movie stars in the country.
Did the best known politicians and movie stars in the country know where the money was coming from that enabled this couple to live in the finest apartments and hotels and dress in the finest fashion?
No, they didn't. And that's because of prohibition. You know, there were an awful lot of people who had an awful lot of money back then who people didn't really know where they got it. The assumption would be that they probably had something to do with prohibition. Now, Richard and Margaret weren't directly involved in prohibition, but they skimmed off the top of prohibition because prohibition made so many people so much money that they didn't know where to spend it all. So what did they do? They bought jewelry, they bought furs, they bought cars, they, you know, went to nightclubs and spent $500 in a night or $1,000 in a night or $2,000 in a night. So the cash was just flying around everywhere.
Right.
Stealing jewelry was their way to get the cash. You know, Richard, it was also very easy back then to just adopt a name. You know, it was hard to identify people. So, you know, they always lived under assumed name somewhere. And whenever anybody would ask Richard what he did, he would just say sales. And, you know, wink and a nod, you're in sales. What are you selling? Probably liquor. But, because of prohibition, everybody was on the take, the politicians and the cops. There was nobody thought worse of you if you were, you know, dealing in liquor or making your money off that trade. So no, they were able to blend right into the era.
We have another interesting question. Gregory Andrew has a question, and it's
Hey,
for
Greg.
you. You have made quite a reputation writing about sports, and he wants to know something about the difference between writing historical books about sports and a historical book about two criminals who captured the public imagination.
There's really not a whole lot of difference, to tell you the truth. It's the same methodology. A lot of my sports titles had intersected with the 1920s, so I was familiar with the culture, because when I'm writing about sports during a specific time, I try to imbue it with, you know, some sense of the time period. But the methodology of creating scenes and trying to bring this to life is the same. You know, if I'm writing about a baseball game and there's an important double play that happens in the World Series, how do I recreate that? Well, I recreate that by reading accounts of that play in 5 or 6 or 7 newspapers. So all of a sudden, it's not just a double play ball. It's a hard hit ground ball that the shortstop backhands, bobbles, and then throws, and the first baseman stretches far out. Now, one single account won't give you all those details, but if you look at 6 or 7 of them, you can flesh it out. One of them might talk about the first baseman stretching. Another one might talk about the shortstop bobbling the ball. Another one might describe how hard the ball is hit. It's the same way in creating scenes in this book, where in a particular jewel heist, you know, one story will say what the make of the car was they got away in. Another one will say what the robbers said when they burst in the door. Another one will talk about how the victims were dressed and how the victims acted. So it's almost like a 3D printer. You take all these different accounts and you layer it. And by layering it, you're able to take what should be what in any single account is two-dimensional, and you build a three-dimensional account through the layering of detail. And because all the details are true, I'm not making any of this stuff up. I'm not
Well,
taking
but
great leaps.
But you bring up a fascinating point. You talk about the tabloid press, which is perhaps not the most dependable historical record. So were there ever points where you would read something and say, well, I can see why the reporter wrote this and the editor let it go, because it sure is fascinating and probably sold a lot of copies of the paper that
Well,
day.
if you got, yeah, if you got like one outlandish report out of 6 or 7, I wouldn't give a whole lot of weight to that one. But at the same time, they weren't all tabloid newspapers.
Right.
And like in every city had 6, 8, 10 newspapers reporting at the same time. And like in New York, you've got the Times, which even then was very staid. You had the Daily News, which was a total tabloid. And then you had these papers in between. A lot of the Brooklyn papers were incredibly useful because they just kind of gave more straightforward reporting in more detail than the Times did. The stories were as long as the one in the tabloids, but they weren't as embellished. So, you take all of those into account, you contrast and compare. And the more you read, say, for instance, the Daily News and the reporters who are covering things, you start to figure out who's faking it, and you just kind of, basically speaking, if I couldn't get like 2 sources on something, if it was something outlandish, I don't use it.
To be tempted to use it just to say, look what they were doing. I mean, the outlandishness is a point of its
it
own
is. There's probably too many of those that I could have done the whole book of just like, and here's the crazy stuff. Well, there's one instance where Richard Whitmore, when he's arrested for the last time, one account had him like holding up 2 $1,000 bills to the cops. And I was like, no way. I found a second account. And what followed from after he's holding up 2 $1,000 bills, the assumption being, guys, take the money and let me go, is that I had 2 different accounts, one of them kind of tabloidy, the other one very staid, who both mentioned that the cop punched him out. Now, one was a little more descriptive. One was like, I think, a left hook, where the other one just says he punched him in the face. But, because I was ready not to use that. And then I found a second accounting of it. And I was like, well, I have to use it now. It's a great image of, Richard Whitmore standing there. Guys, here's you're a cop, then you're making maybe $2,000 a year. And he's holding up 2 $1,000 bills. And the cops were like, no, screw you. Bam.
Well, especially when you knew it was a left hook.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing that was a punch, but there's an interesting question from Don Weisberger says, was there one piece of the story that you struggled to find, and did it show up in a surprising and aha moment sort of way?
Oh, there were a lot of those. When they finally get arrested for the last time, Richard tries to make the point that, he wants Tiger Girl to go free. So he tries to say, she hasn't even been in town. She's not here, and it was pretty clear she was there. She'd left their luxury apartment because they were going to commit some more crimes. So she'd moved into a hotel. And towards the end of writing the book, right, there was a story where she mentioned that he had given her a dog. The dog's name was Bades. And when she was arrested in this hotel, she had the dog with her. That told me that without any doubt, she had been in New York, living in that apartment with him while they were committing the crime that the biggest crime that they absolutely know they did. And it was because later on she just mentioned that he'd gotten me the dog Bades. And and that then the other thing too was I found out very late in the game that, after Margaret, you know, after everything, Margaret remarries.
After Richard
And
is dead.
yes.
Yeah.
And I actually was able to track down the fact that she had a daughter and was able to make contact with her daughter to see if she wanted to contribute anything, because Margaret's later years are a bit of a mystery. The daughter is 90 years old and chose through an intermediary, through another relative, she chose not to contribute. She didn't try to stop me or anything, but she just, very politely declined. But that was something that I pursued for months and months and months. I don't identify the daughter in the book. I didn't want to bring any undue attention to someone who is 90 years old and may or may not have known anything about her mother. But I did hear from other family members, and none of them had any idea that she had even been married before. This was a total revelation to them, that this woman that they knew as an elderly woman had this, torrid past when she was, 21, 22 years old.
Yeah. We're gonna, if you don't mind, step away from the book for a moment, because Rod Kessler, who is the father of the brilliant former producer of Only a Game, Martin Kessler, wants to know, he heard that I said we had known each other for a long time, and we have, and our friendship and association goes all the way back to where you were reading baseball poems outside Fenway Park into a tiny public address system, to the delight of few and consternation of many. I mention that because it has to have been 35 years ago.
I started doing that, and I did start doing that. Shortly after I came to Boston in 1981, and I decided I would do that because I was a poetry major and I wanted to combine two things I liked. So I think beginning in 1982, for 9 years in a row, I stood outside the Green Monster on opening day and would read baseball poetry out of a pig-nosed amplifier while wearing an old baseball uniform. And I would send out press releases, and you were one of the suckers that showed up.
Suckers.
But I think you just stumbled on me. I don't even think you got the press
radio.
Yeah. So, but I met you, and I met Bob Holler of the Globe that way.
Yep.
He wrote a story on me when he was writing for one of the New Hampshire papers. So that's how Bill and I got to know each other. Well, it's almost 40 years ago, Bill.
100 Glenn Stout books ago.
Yeah.
Just
happened. About, yeah.
Right. So I'm curious also about, this is a nasty question to ask somebody who's trying to, talk about a book that they're writing. And I hope this book is tremendously successful. It certainly deserves to be. It's great fun. Are you tempted to stick with the sort of sensational crime genre as you move forward, or have you kind of exhausted that and you're ready to try something else?
I'm not sure. I'm just kind of waiting for another story, and there's maybe a few candidates that I'm just intrigued by. I mean, I wrote Young Woman in the Sea, the biography of Trudy Utterly, because I stumbled across headlines about her while I was writing a book about the New York Yankees. So I kind of like the serendipity of that, where something piques my curiosity. And I figure if it piques my curiosity, maybe readers will like it too. And, I am kind of intrigued by that time period. I keep circling around the 1920s, and I think I have a feel for it. There's things again, because there's such resonance to today. We have everything, the only thing we don't have is the fuel of prohibition. Otherwise, between the war and a pandemic and an economic downturn, it's all right there right now. So, maybe something like that, we'll see. I'm just waiting. Every book, particularly books like this, they're really exhausting. Yeah. It takes about a year to kind of come back online to where you can dive into something again. So I'm kind of, I'm getting a little antsy, but we'll see.
I have some good news for you, Glenn. On the chat portion of this event, Gregory Andrew has announced, I kid you not, Amazon just now delivered my copy of the book. So there's one out there.
There we go. I'm glad it made it out there to you, Greg.
Frequently when people will meet me and say, oh, I read your book, whichever book they're talking about, and my comeback is always, aha, it was you.
Yeah. Exactly. You always, you never know, you always hope that it's going to happen, but
Absolutely.
it's nice. People have been very kind over the last couple of days, sending me pictures of the books that they've received in the mail. And, somebody sent me a picture of it in a bookstore, and that's always great to see.
This is you talk about times and the sort of characteristics of different eras. And this is such a strange time for books, because on the one hand, here we are doing this event that, of course, it would have been much more fun to do live in front of a live audience at Belmont Books. And on the other, so it's a tough time to sell a book,
Sure.
Is my point. But on the other hand, people who really are taking seriously the advice to not travel, stay home, take care of yourself, don't run the risk of spreading the pandemic, are reading in great numbers.
And this book is a great excuse to stay in for the next week.
Absolutely.
This is a critical time. Take it to the beach this summer. I think we'll probably be able to do that. But for right now, kind of stay in, and books are, when I got done with this, one of the first things I did was I ordered a whole bunch of books, because now I'd have the time to read them finally. And that's been great fun, because I haven't had a whole lot of time. When you're working on a book,
No,
you don't have a lot of time to read other things, and there's a lot of wonderful work out there.
What you especially don't want to do is read a book by somebody who's a better writer than you are, because
I stopped reading those really quick.
You want to maintain the illusion that what you're doing is as good as it can be.
That's right.
Well,
I scratch in the margins of those. Yeah.
Right. I'm one of the people who did read this, took advantage of staying home to read this. And I read it first in bound galleys. And that's not the easiest way to read a book, but it was wonderful. And I can't say enough good things about it. And as I say, I hope that it finds a large audience. I'm trying to see if there are any other questions coming in right now, and there is. Where is Kevin? Kevin, I don't know how to pronounce your Latin name. Kazwara. Where is Glenn keeping all those files these days? That basement office has to be pretty full at this point of notes and clippings plus BASW stuff.
There they are. There's my highly organized office.
Excellent. Excellent.
I in fact, everything from the book basically is still sitting where it was when I finally got through the galleys and everything, because I just had hip replacement. I haven't been able to come down the basement. This is like my first time in the basement in about 6 weeks. So, that's everything's still sitting there. I've got some organization to do. But while I'm in the midst of writing a book, it might look like a mess to everybody else, but
where every piece of
I know where things are. A lot of younger writers want to know, how do you organize things? And I know some people are organization fiends, and they use programs and binders and index cards, and they put Post-its on the walls and stuff like that. I use piles of folders. That's how I've always done it. It works for me. I'm too old to change at this point. So
that the whole idea of it works for me. Do you believe that, and I know you have done some teaching, how much can you teach somebody about writing? To what extent is that a trade that can be taught?
I think the thing you can teach more than anything else is confidence. That's the biggest impediment to anybody writing is, you have to get over that moment when you approach the laptop and go, and now I'm writing. And all of a sudden you're doing something different. You have to kind of integrate it into your life, make it a normal thing, and then go forward with confidence. That's what I've, more than anything, that I've tried to tell younger writers or less experienced writers. And find the way that works best for you. Don't beat yourself up because you're not doing it the way somebody else you read about it did. I mean, when I was younger, I remember reading that, writer such and such had written 1 million words by the time he was 20 years old. Oh my God, I was just like blown away. I'm terrible. I can never be a writer. I haven't written 1 million words. Well, at one time I actually sat down and counted them up, and I almost had. Now they weren't very good, but I'd put a lot of letters on pages, and that kind of got me over that. And I figured, and then you get to know writers, and everybody does it different,
right?
And find the way that works for you, that makes you comfortable. Like, I couldn't change the way I do things now. That if I was to try to get a different organization, I would get lost in the organization of it. So that's what I, and then once you have the confidence, just get something on the page. Once it's on the page, now you have something to work with, but you got to get your butt in a chair, and you got to stay there, and you got to put words on the page, and then you can fix them.
Just to go to the other extreme, I read somewhere recently that Flaubert wrote a paragraph a day.
I tend to, like, when I'm writing a lot, I'll write for hours, and then I'll go months and I won't write anything. You kind of like, you empty the vessel, and then you got to, like, let things fill up. Or when you're working on a book, I talk about, the hard drive is always working because you've been researching. And I always try to say that when you start writing the book in your head, when you're doing other things, like you're doing the dishes or you're making dinner or something, that's the time you need to get in front of the typewriter or the laptop, because your brain is telling you we're ready, because you're not even paying attention, and all of a sudden you're writing the book. So capture those moments, capture that energy.
Flinder Boyd wants to know whether you have particular perfect actors to cast when the movie is made.
Only old ones. I mean, Richard Whittemore reminds me of John Garfield in a lot of ways. Looks kind of like him, and I think he might have, like, when Garfield's playing a tough guy, I think he was kind of like that. I think Margaret, it's funny, nobody ever really did a gangster film that focuses a lot on the gun mole. They're always side figures. In fact, I think this is the first book where the gun mole actually has, like, an equal role in the book. So, so the gun moles in old films don't quite match up because they never give them anything to do. That's a really good question, though. But I think, hey, if I was a Hollywood producer, this is like made for it. You've got, get a young, unknown, couple and send them out there and let the sparks fly, because that's what happened with these two.
No. That's not the way it works.
I know that's not the way it works. That's the way it should work.
Is you get Beyonce and you get her interested in the role, and then the movie makes itself.
Right. But I'm all ears, Flinder. You send me your list. Actually, Flinder, you could do it. You're kind of a good-looking guy.
Lori Walter wants to know, are the pictures behind you the people you write about? I know that at least on my screen, Tiger Girl is quite.
Yeah, they're all from the book except for this one, which is here. Can you see that now? A little bit.
Yep.
This one, which is actually a picture of me and a girl I went to high school with. We ran for class president and vice president as Bonnie and Clyde, and and I'm 16 years old, and we ran into the cafeteria. You couldn't do this today. We ran into the cafeteria, firing off an air gun, throwing fake money around, and dressed like this. So we had that picture taken there. I thought it just fit, you know.
Yeah, well, your passion for the subject has suddenly, come into focus here.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
Well, you know, who knows? I was trying out for the film before the book was even written.
Right, right. Well, I think I've gotten to all the questions that I can see, although Gregory Andrew wants to know, are you sure you're not related to the Candy Kid? I don't see any evidence of that.
I'm still alive, for one thing. So, yeah, and anytime I was, offered the opportunity to commit a heinous crime, and it did happen a couple of times, I was far too much a coward to take advantage of it. So, I commit all my crimes on paper.
I'm glad that you were too cowardly to take advantage of that invitation, because it might have been the premature end to a potentially brilliant career.
I might just end up with I might have ended up with a prison memoir.
Yeah, exactly. Which is not to say there are not some great ones.
No, that's true. That's true.
There's some wonderful writing that's come with the relative period of inactivity that some incarcerated people have had thrust upon them.
As you know, Bill teaches writing in a prison right now. So
it's about to go back.
You have lots of time there.
Somebody had a wonderful comment recently regarding me. Said, "Well, Bill's been spending time in prison," with no further explanation.
There you go.
Glenn, this has been fun.
It has been fun, Bill. It's always fun when we chat, and this time people get to listen in on it. So.
Yes, and the questions were good, and I think they drew out some stuff that I hadn't thought of. So
yeah, and I thank everyone, and I do have signed book plates that if you send me a SAISY, you can Google me and find my address. Send me a SAISY, I can inscribe and sign a book plate.
That
would be
a self-addressed stamped envelope.
That's right. That's right. And I'm happy to do
Glenn.
that. And thanks for everyone for showing up and, talk about the book, tell your friends, write online reviews on Goodreads and everywhere else. That really helps.
Put it on your coffee table.
And put it on your coffee table. Just don't spill coffee on it.
Right. Well, then I have to get another one.
Yeah.
Glenn
Okay,
and
spill
Bill, thank
coffee
you
on
so
it.
much. We really
Thank you.
appreciate you spending this time with us. And
Well,
Glenn,
thank
we
you
wish
so
you the
much.
best of luck with your book. It was exciting to be here on your launch day. And Bill, thank you so much for taking the time. The two of you
Pleasure.
obviously have great rapport and made for a very fun event. Everybody who came, thank you so much for coming out. And we hope you all are safe and well. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Read it or else.